What's up, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Wolverine Live. I am your host, Holland. Sorry we didn't have a show last week. I was on vacation, went out to the Outer Banks for a little while. So, again, apologies for that. But we are back on our normal schedule. As always, I'll be answering all of your questions in the order they come in into the chat box. If you do want to skip the line, you can leave a super chat, click that little dollar symbol with the box around it that allows you to skip the line. And that also donates to my travel budget so I can continue to see top recruits around the country. I was in Dallas and New Orleans over the weekend and had a chance to see five-star quarterback Ryder Lyons, five-star wide receiver Tristan Keys. So if you want updates, in-person analysis on those types of guys, again, make sure to hit that dollar symbol with the box, and that is a super chat, and you can skip the line. And if not, we will answer the questions in the order in which they came. But very quickly, before we do that, make sure to like this video so we can continue to get in front of other Michigan fans. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for free. Get notifications every time we drop new updates. And if you're not a member of the Wolverine.com, right now is the perfect time to subscribe. Just $1 for 2 months using the promo code UM1. Obviously, a lot of recruiting information flowing in from my time on the road, seeing five stars to five stars getting on campus this week with guys like Jackson Cantwell and Carter Meadows. Spring ball starting up, so our team guys will have a lot of intel on how the guys on the roster are looking. So it's a terrific time to subscribe. Use that promo code UM1. That's $1 for 2 months over at thewolverine.com. All right, let's go ahead and start off with customer service. He says, EJ, you are the best in the business, period. Appreciate it. And we are going to customer service again. He says, what happens if Ryder Lyon commits and Trey Taylor wants to commit to Michigan? Would we keep both of them? Also, is Trey Taylor a potential reclassification kid? I haven't heard that Trey Taylor is a reclass kid. It seems to be the more popular option these days if you're a big time recruit, but there's definitely hasn't been anything of substance regarding a potential reclass for him. I think Trey Taylor might end up making a decision before Ryder Lyons, which is pretty interesting considering Ryder Lyons is technically part of the 2026 class despite taking the 18-month mission. So you might see Trey Taylor pick a school in June. But if I were to guess right now, I would say that Taylor doesn't end up at Michigan. Could that change? Certainly. But I don't think this is trending towards Michigan right now. In the scenario that you're asking, if Ryder Lyons commits and Trey Taylor still wants to come to Michigan, I could definitely see it. I mean, but both, again, would technically be 27s. I think the preference at that point, if Lyons were to commit to Michigan, would still be to take a 26 just to add some immediate depth to the room. Again, Lyons is taking an 18-month mission. So, I still think you take maybe a really high upside guy like an Oscar Rios, or you can take a really high floor guy, or you can get a young guy out of the portal. But I don't really envision Lyons and Taylor ending up at the same school. All right, customer service. Did you do anything fun on your vacation? Not really, mostly just relaxed. It was kind of the off season out in the Outer Banks, so not a lot to do. So just went around the beach and stuff. Customer service again says, which former recruit not on the current Michigan roster do you keep in touch with the most? I don't really keep in touch with a lot of guys, once they kind of move on, I'll probably hit them up here and there while they're at Michigan, but once guys really move on to the NFL and things like that, it's pretty minimal. I did hear from Will Johnson's dad the other day, which was great. And, I'm really excited to see Will go in the draft this spring. Customer service again says, did you watch the Michigan basketball games against Maryland or Wisconsin? You cannot pay me to watch basketball. And that is not a shout out at Michigan. Obviously, I will not watch any basketball. I have no interest in basketball. I am football only. Just it doesn't move the needle for me. If I watch another sport, you guys know it's boxing, and I will watch international soccer. I will try to get into the Club World Cup this summer, even though I don't watch club soccer. But outside of that, don't really watch sports. Customer service says, which 2026 recruit are you most likely to put in a prediction for next? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like I've put in a couple of predictions recently. You know, I put one in for Jamian Osborne. I put one in for Matt Ludwig. I think one that I would consider maybe after the weekend is Hudson Dunn. He is a 3-star linebacker from Arizona. Maybe not a guy that you all have heard about a ton, but he is originally from the state of Michigan, so he's a Michigander. He grew up in West Bloomfield and didn't move out to Arizona until recently. He's a Michigan legacy. His mother attended Michigan. He has a personal relationship with Sherrone Moore, Brian G. Mary, obviously very involved in that recruitment. So Hudson Dunn, certainly one to keep an eye on as he makes yet another visit to Michigan. Customer service says, which 2027 recruit are you most likely to put in a prediction for? Probably a little too early for 2027s. I do have some early ones in for some of the in-state guys. It's an elite class in the state of Michigan in 2027, whereas 2026 is a little bit more of a down year. You really only have, as far as high-end guys, CJ Sadler and Gregory Patrick. So I have an early one in for Anthony Cartwright, who's a top 100 tight end visiting in April. I have an early one in for Dakota Warrant, who'll be back on campus this week and is actually ranked as the nation's #1 receiver in 2027. So I already have a few early, not really close to any others in 27 off the top of my head. Customer service says, is there any news on Oscar Rios and a possibility of an offer? I think right now they're really focused on Ryder Lyons. Brady Smeagol is still hanging around. Obviously, he's trending to Washington. As of now, he's still scheduled to visit Michigan. We'll see if that happens. Matt Ponatoski, obviously, is still on the board, but, baseball could be the route he chooses to go to. He is a high-end Major League Baseball prospect. So, Rios is definitely a guy they could circle back to, especially during the spring evaluation period when Chip Lindsey would have a chance to see him throw again. Customer service says, how's the Donald Tabron recruitment going? Yeah, it's still super early for Donald Tabron. I actually had a chance to see him live in New Orleans over the weekend and posted some clips of him. I mean, super intriguing kid out of Cass Tech. I wrote he could be the next 5-star quarterback out of the Detroit area. And I really do think he could follow in the footsteps of guys like Bryce Underwood and Dante Moore. He's very advanced as a passer early on. He can throw the ball downfield. It was windy as hell in New Orleans, and he still had some really accurate passes, short to intermediate, hit a couple of deep balls as well. Again, really polished, led Cass Tech to a state title as a freshman, which is extremely impressive. And you could see even in 7-on-7, the leadership was there. The high character was there. I really enjoyed my conversation with Donald Tabron as well. Just seems like a really great kid. I think he has a chance to be, one of the top players in the country in his class. But again, super early for 2028s, but obviously the familiarity is already there with Michigan. He wears number 19, just like Bryce Underwood. They train with the same trainer and quarterback coach, Donovan Dooley. So that connection could definitely help Michigan as well. But, I think Tabron is definitely a guy Michigan fans should keep an eye on for the future. Ben Ricketts says, where does Michigan stand with Carter Meadows? Do you see his recruitment being similar to Babalola's? Yeah, I wrote that in our big insider piece yesterday, which you can find over at thewolverine.com. I talked a lot more about Carter and Jackson Cantwell. I don't think this one is going to be like a true NIL bidding war. At least not right now. It doesn't seem that way. Meadows does have some offers from some of the SEC schools, but I think early on right now, and again, a lot can change, especially in a 5-star recruitment. But I think right now, Penn State and Michigan have the inside track. And look, Carter Meadows, he's a Gonzaga kid. And, Michigan's done well at that school. The last few cycles, obviously landing Kainoa Winston and Evan Link. Gonzaga is one of the premier academic programs on the East Coast. And Meadows isn't just, any regular student there. He has a 3.95 GPA, which is very impressive at a school like Gonzaga. So I think he'd be a great culture fit at Michigan. I think similar to Babalola, he is taking academics seriously. If there is a dark horse NIL school, it would probably right now be South Carolina. He's been there in the past. They've recruited well in the DMV, specifically edge rushers. Sterling Lucas is a phenomenal recruiter. He landed Dylan Stewart. He landed Nicholas Harbor. So, those were 5-star edges out of the same region. But I think Michigan and Penn State are right at the top. And given Michigan's, connections to Gonzaga and having Kainoa Winston still at school right now, he's a regular enrollee consistently in Meadows' ear. I think that'll help the Wolverines. So I think Michigan has a really good shot with Carter Meadows. Ben Rickett says, who are some defensive tackles and edges that you could see in the class? That's a good question. I mean, I could definitely see the dream duo for me at edge would definitely be Carter Meadows and Jake Krull. I don't know if that will end up happening. Obviously, again, that's just best case scenario. I think you could see a duo at edge of Carter Meadows and Tyson Harley. Tyson Harley's probably not a name that you guys have heard about a ton, but he is Meadows' teammate. He was a huge riser in the rankings. He's up into the on 300. I was really impressed with him this fall. I saw Gonzaga twice. Obviously went out to see Kainoa, but I kept a close eye on both Meadows and Harley. And in both of those games, Harley had more production. Now, Harley doesn't have the athletic upside or the freaky length of a Carter Meadows, but he is a very powerful, compact edge that complements Meadows well. And you see that, if you have a chance to go, maybe you watch a Gonzaga game or just the defensive clips, you'll see how well they complement each other. They're a really fun edge duo to watch. So I could definitely see both of the Gonzaga guys in the class. As far as a defensive line, Michigan's really high up there for Damari Simeon and Titan Davis. Those are some of the guys they really want. I could see them landing maybe Tyson Bacon, who's committed to Tennessee. He's visiting. He has some ties to the state of Michigan. Michigan's a finalist for Alex Haskell, who's visiting later in the spring. Jermaine Kinsler, even though he's committed to Texas A&M, if Michigan's able to land Jordan Thomas, maybe the Wolverines can, get a flip later on in the cycle. I think predicting the defensive line class right now is pretty tough. Ben Rickett says, I know it's early, but who might be some flip targets? Yeah, there's definitely already some flip targets. I mentioned Jermaine Kinsler as a guy that, Michigan could look to flip later on. There's a couple of guys at linebacker they're working on. Shadarius Tootle, who's committed to Auburn. He's set to visit twice this offseason, one for an official visit in the summer, and he'll be on campus later this spring. Xavier Griffin, who's committed to USC, is definitely one to watch. They're looking to get him on campus, and Brian Jean Mary went to go see him during the spring evaluation period. Certainly wouldn't rule out Victor Singleton in the secondary. He committed to Illinois, but I mean, come on, it's Illinois, and Michigan was very high on his list early on. Shavar Young, who was another defensive back, he's committed to Clemson. Michigan did a great job with him during the winter contact period. We expect him to get to campus. Darrell Bell, who's committed to Florida State, is looking at visiting. So there's quite a few flip targets already on the board. Ben Rickett says, what do you think commitment odds would be for the following defensive backs? Victor Singleton, CJ Sadler, Albert Hill, or Jordan Thomas? Well, they're recruiting CJ Sadler as a wide receiver, but I think, odds are still pretty high for him. I mentioned I still think Michigan has a legitimate shot to flip Victor Singleton, but we'll have to kind of wait and see. I think odds are pretty low for Albert Hill. And then for Jordan Thomas, I still think they're pretty high. I mean, he's set to make his spring visit on April 15th. He's targeting a spring decision. So I think the Wolverines getting him in a little later on in the spring will help. Texas A&M definitely worries me, given that they just landed Jermaine Kinsler. Ohio State's a school that I would watch closely. They've had success at Bergen recently, his high school, Bergen Catholic. Obviously, they pulled Quincy Porter out of there last cycle, and they have really good ties to the coaching staff there. And there's a few other players, Texas, USC, that are in the mix as well. But I still think Michigan's definitely a front runner in that recruitment. Tyson Smith or Matt Schwartz 10 says, hi, hello. Tyson Smith says, will we pay to land Cantwell? I think so. Some of the numbers I've heard early on for Cantwell are extremely high, very, very high, more than you would have to pay more here than you would have for, Ty Haywood last cycle. So I think Michigan obviously knows that. Cantwell's already signed a deal with NIL agent Drew Rosenhaus, who's obviously a big player in professional football and has long been a mega agent. So you can kind of infer that NIL will be the biggest factor here. And I mean, you look at the schools involved, aside from Michigan, I mean, the big contenders are Miami and Oregon. Georgia, obviously, is no stranger to NIL either, but Miami and Oregon are two, teams that often take the we won't be outbid approach. And then Mizzou, I've heard, it's the school closest to home. They obviously want to keep him in state, and I've heard they're being very aggressive with what they're putting together too. So, yeah, I mean, I think Michigan is fully aware. They're not oblivious of what it would take to land Cantwell. I think those discussions have already, started on the back channels. So I think they will definitely explore and make an aggressive push to be right up there with the offers that others put on the table. I think the NIL value for Cantwell has gone up over $1 million. And those NIL valuations on the On3 profiles obviously are just kind of a gauge. They're not fully accurate, but I agree with it. I think the package that Cantwell receives will be north of $1 million for sure. So, but yeah, Michigan's fully aware with that. I think they'll be just as competitive as an Oregon or a Miami in that one. Will we pay to land Tristan Keys? This one's interesting. I think Michigan is changing its philosophy with NIL and elite wide receivers. It's not a position that they've valued a ton, but you invested millions of dollars in Bryce Underwood. You want to get him some elite weapons on the outside. On top of that, the wide receiver room just needs help in general, right? So it makes a lot of sense to go after, the biggest fish you can at the wide receiver position this cycle. I think a lot of people laughed or thought I was clickbaiting when I mentioned Chris Henry a couple months ago, and then Sherrone Moore shows up at a school and it's kind of downplayed. Or, Tristan Keys leaves Michigan out of his top 12, and all of a sudden they're getting a spring visit on April 5th. Calvin Russell, top 50 wide receiver out of Miami, wasn't even talked about. He's on campus this week. So it's clear Michigan is definitely exploring the potential to pay big for a wide receiver this cycle. Tristan Keys is definitely at the very top of that board. Obviously, he's the number one wide receiver in the country. And, I think Michigan, aside from just being able to offer NIL, Sherrone Moore has done a really good job of building a relationship here. Ron Bellamy has as well. And then the potential to play with Bryce Underwood is obviously appealing to any wide receiver, and something Tristan Keys told me when I saw him in Dallas over the weekend that he's very interested in doing. So I think Bryce will spend a lot of time with Keys in early April when Keys makes his way to Ann Arbor. I think with wide receiver, it's in an exploring phase. Whereas I think with Cantwell and offensive line recruiting, it's proven already. They did it last cycle. I think they would do it again. That's not to say that they won't do it with wide receiver, but I think, it's something they're really looking at, and we just need to see, further evidence. But I do think it's a very serious option there for Michigan to pay big for a top end wide receiver this cycle. Tyson Smith says, do you pay to watch movies in the theaters? A lot of pay questions here. I still pay to watch movies in the theaters. I love going to the theaters. It's like one of my favorite things to do. Anytime it's my birthday or Christmas or any holiday outside of lame St. Patrick's Day, which nobody cares about except for lame ass Notre Dame. Any holiday, I prefer to go to the movies. I like to sit down. I like to eat food. I like to enjoy the movie on the big screen. But most of all, I just like feeling the, kind of nostalgic aura around the movie theater. There's still something about going and buying a ticket and sitting down and, watching the movie in there as opposed to just turning on the Fire Stick. That makes it a little special. I like going to the movies. I would even go to the movies alone. It's a great time. Kinetic 615 says, can you tell us who all is visiting this week and your thoughts on our chances with them? Well, Kinetic 615, I have an offer for you. I previewed every single visitor making their way to Ann Arbor or visitors that are already on campus right now. Every recruit set to be in Ann Arbor or already in Ann Arbor over the next 48 hours. You can get a full list, my thoughts on where Michigan stands over at thewolverine.com. Use the promo code UM1. That's $1 for 2 months over at thewolverine.com, where you can find the entire visit list for all of spring. And this week's visitors list, obviously, like I said, full preview. I'll have another preview going into the weekend. Some big names set to be on campus. Jackson Cantwell, Jay Cruel are just some of the names, right now on campus. You have Calvin Russell, who I just mentioned, top 100 wide receiver. I think Michigan, sorry, we just had a super chat, but I think Michigan has a lot of talent this week. Carter Meadows is set to be on campus later on in the week. Matt Ludwig is set to be on campus. So you can get all my thoughts over at thewolverine.com. We do have a super chat from Sean O'Hara, and he says, do you think we can get in on Zion Elee, otherwise edge targets that you feel good about? Probably not. Elee's committed to Maryland. I think they've put together a really strong NIL package. He hasn't really shown any interest in Michigan. I get that, the Wolverines recently brought Biff back on staff. And for those who don't know who we're talking about, it's Zion Elee, the number one edge in the country out of Baltimore St. Francis. Maybe later on, like Derek Moore was super late, for example, maybe later on Michigan can get involved, but right now, nothing leads me to believe that they will. In terms of other edge targets, like I said, Carter Meadows and Jake Cruel, I think, are at the top of the wish list. Others that I would keep an eye on, like I said, Tyson Harley, out of Gonzaga, same school as Carter Meadows. Julian Walker out of South Carolina, he's visiting this spring. Jackson Ford, on 300 edge out of Pennsylvania, is set to make a multi-day visit next week, I believe. So yeah, definitely some of those other edges to know Let's go ahead and go to Kinetic 615. Jaziel Hart recently left Michigan out of a top teams list, but then said Michigan is still in it. Any insight? Might have just been a mistake. I know he requested a graphic that we're still waiting on weeks later that definitely had Michigan on it. And obviously, he's still set to make an OV to Michigan on June 20th. So nothing really new to report on Jaziel. I talk to him all the time, actually. So I should be seeing him again in a couple weeks. Tom H says, any news on Jackson Ford out of Pennsylvania? Yeah, like I just said, he's definitely high on the edge board as well. He's set to make a multi-day visit. He's a guy that very smart kid, really high academic kid. I think Michigan and Penn State are the front runners there, much like Carter Meadows. He's also really high on schools like USC and Stanford. But I think if distance is a factor, it'll really come down to Michigan and Penn State. Wolverine Casual says, hi, EJ, would you rather be a dog trapped in the body of a cat or a cat trapped in the body of a dog? That's a weird question. I would rather be a dog trapped in the body of a cat, I guess, because cats don't really have to do a whole lot. Not that dogs have to do a whole lot either, but cats would still naturally, even if you transported into the body of a cat, you would still have the instincts to do what a cat does, I assume. So that also includes like sleeping 18 hours a day. And I never get any sleep. So I'd really want to be a cat and just go to sleep. Tom H says, please tell me something encouraging about our linebacker recruiting. Well, like I mentioned earlier in the show, I think I'd be close to putting in a prediction for Hudson Dunn, 3-star linebacker out of Arizona. I think Michigan is moving in a positive direction with the Virginia kids, Markel Dabney and with Matthew Canoe. Both are set to be on campus this spring. Shadarius Tootle is kind of the big-time guy. He's committed to Auburn, but has 2 off-season visits set. So there's some positive news with linebackers. Wolverine Casual says, any commits coming soon, you think? I think maybe some of these guys that visit in the spring could definitely pop sooner than expected. A lot of recruits have said they're taking it into summer. Really, the only big target that has said, I'm going to commit this spring is Jordan Thomas. Alex Haskell is a 3-star defensive lineman who has Michigan in his Final Four. He also recently told me he's committing in the spring. But maybe Michigan really moves the needle with Matt Ludwig. They get him to shut it down. They could maybe do the same thing for Javian Osborne, or like I said, Hudson Dunn. It just really depends on how these visits go. Customer service says, who do you think is going to commit next? Like I said, I really just think it's, how these visits go. I think you could have someone, pop sooner than expected. Customer service says, what's the latest with Javian and Savion? What's the deal with Hampton too? Evan Hampton just committed to Louisville. They were going to slow play him anyway. With Javian Osborne, I still think Michigan is the leader there, but definitely making the rounds, checking out some other schools. He was just at Notre Dame, USC recently, came back into the picture. He visited Georgia recently, but I still think Michigan's the team to beat there. Savion Hyder is definitely taking his time. I still like where Michigan stands there too. Nothing much has changed. He doesn't really want to make many spring visits. He's already seen his finalists many times. So I know he's set to go out to Tennessee. He wants to get to know that new running backs coach a little bit more. Set to go out to Ohio State because there was kind of a drop-off in contact when Alfred left and Lachlan came in. So I think he wants to, just get back out there one more time before seeing official visits. But nothing to really worry about Savion. He's just how he handles his business. So he's he has a great family and a great team behind him. So he's just not about recruiting. He's not a guy that wants to go out and see places. Customer service says, which tight end duo do you see most likely in the class? If I were to give a prediction, it would be Matt Ludwig and Mason Bonner, who is on campus this week. I know we haven't talked a lot about Mason Bonner, but he's at the very top of the tight end board as well, along with Luedecke and Brock Harris and guys like that. They really love Mason Bonner. He's a tall, athletic pass catcher out of Denver, and would pair really well with Luedecke. Tom H says, of the following two tight ends, Ian Premer and Brock Harris, who do you see as the most likely to commit to Michigan? I know you already have a prediction in for Luedecke. Premer hasn't visited yet. Obviously, he is visiting this week. But, Michigan playing catch up there. The more likely candidate would be Brock Harris, just because he's been on campus multiple times. He's scheduled to visit again later on this month. So, of the two, Brock Harris is more realistic. Let's go down to customer service. Oh, it looks like we are over time, guys. Before we get into rapid fire, I do want to bring you a message from our sponsor, My Perfect Franchise. Are you a displaced corporate executive or wanting to put your career in your own hands? Or are you an experienced entrepreneur wanting to diversify? Well, Andy Luedecke can help. Andy is a huge college sports fan and a franchise veteran, having owned multiple franchises and businesses. Using his expertise, he helps others find their American dream through a very thorough consultation and evaluation process. Call Andy, put your life and career in your own hands. Best of all, his services are 100% free to you. So what do you have to lose? My Perfect Franchise is a great opportunity. I actually had Chick-fil-A for lunch, and they took forever to fill my order today. And I was like, what if I just owned this Chick-fil-A? Then I wouldn't have to wait. Then I could just get all the nuggets to myself. And you can too. Just hit up Andy. Call him at 404-973-9901 or email him at andy@myperfectfranchise.net. Live out your American dream. Your opportunity is waiting at My Perfect Franchise. All right, let's get into rapid fire. Customer service says, who are your sleeper defensive tackles in this class? The Kenneth Grants and Mason Grahams of the class. I don't know if there's a Kenneth Grant or a Mason Graham in this class or, on the offer list yet, but some names to know that are, 3-star guys that Michigan really likes are Ben Boulware and Noah Clark out of North Carolina. Wolverine Casual says, do NIL recruitments typically close later in the cycles or just whenever? And they can happen whenever, but they will not be finalized until later in the cycle. Even if you have an NIL recruitment and early, that one is going to that price is going to keep going up over the cycle. Wolverine Casual says, is Tristan Keys fast? He's fast enough. He's not a burner. He's more of a guy that he's bigger. The natural wide receiver skills are there. He's a great route runner, snatches the ball out of the air. Great catch radius, super athletic, can high point the ball, but not a guy that is just going to kill you with speed. Tom H says, did you learn anything more watching Ryder Lyons this past week? I think he checked the boxes I was expecting him to. His escapability is there, his ability to throw on the run, just a really exciting player, similar to JJ McCarthy in that regard, not similar to JJ in the sense that he still has steps to take when it comes to just processing and being decisive and accurate, short to intermediate. I think he struggled a little bit between the hashes, but man, the arm talent is tremendous. The athleticism is tremendous. The excitement, the ceiling, the things that I love in a quarterback, they're all there with Ryder Lyons. Wolverine Casual says, do you prioritizing premier offensive linemen from high school is dangerous? What positions are easy to miss bust and what positions are typically easy to project for college? That's a good question. Offensive line is kind of tough to project. I think you see a lot more boom or bust with offensive line recruits. I think in general, I've had pretty decent offensive line evaluations. I think that this is going to be a weird one. I think quarterback is obviously very difficult to evaluate because there's a lot that goes into that. I think like safety or corner, I think defensive backs in general are really fun. And as long as you have the athletic traits, there's, it's easier to hit on that position. I don't like evaluating linebackers for some reason. I think that's a tough one. Um, in terms of like the first question, do you prioritize premier or do I don't know. There's a grammar error there. But is prioritizing premier offensive linemen from high school dangerous? Like I said, it could be just because there are, it does vary. There could be more of a bust ratio there. But that's why you have the transfer portal. No big deal if you miss on a high school offensive line evaluation. Wolverine Casual says, any chance we circle around to blast from the past? Gatlin Blair. It's Gatlin Bear, not Blair. And I was actually talking about Gatlin Bear this weekend because, obviously we're all in Dallas for the OT7 tournament, and Ryder Lyons is going on his mission. And, I asked Ryder, have you gotten your assignment yet? And he told me he hadn't. And, other reporters asked me, where's Ryder going on his mission? And I was like, oh, he hasn't gotten his assignment. And they're like, I wonder where Gatlin Bear ended up. And I was like, he's actually here. He's in Dallas right now. So Gatlin's finishing up his mission. I assume, I think, he was there or he's doing the full 2 years, but I haven't heard that Michigan is getting back in the picture. But the thing about Michigan kids is they sign a non-binding agreement. So technically Michigan could call him up after his mission, or email him during his mission. Contact with Michigan kids is very limited. They have super limited access to phones and social media and emails, and they can only check emails on certain days. But I think Michigan could certainly call him up and be like, hey, we'll pay you a bunch of money to just come play at Michigan. The Wolverines definitely need that game-changing speed, and Gatlin has it. Tyree Smiley says, where do you think the class finishes at? I think they'll finish top 10 again. Customer service says, are there any fast wide receivers? I think this crop of wide receivers, the highly touted guys, the elite guys, don't have that game-changing speed, unfortunately. Customer service says, oh, I guess that was the same question. Customer service also says, how's the Felix Ojo recruitment going? It's going well. Michigan obviously locked him in for an OV. I think the preference is probably for Michigan to pay and land Cantwell. But if they don't get Cantwell, or, they deem it to be too much, then, Felix Ojo could be another one that they spend big on. Wolverine Casual says, what is a slow, average, fast, elite 100-meter time for a wide receiver? I would say anything between a 10.7 and a 10.9 is good. You're plenty fast. You have good speed. You have high-end speed. You can definitely stretch the field. With between a 10.75 and a 10.95, I'd go with that. You can definitely stretch the field. You can definitely be a vertical threat. Anything below a 10.75, or I guess anything between a 10.6 and a 10.75, you have elite speed. You're a burner. Anything below 10.55, down into the 10.4s, like you are one of the fastest players in America, and you are the elite of the elite. If you run in between an 11 and an 11.3, it's fine. Especially if you're a bigger receiver, you're okay. If you run slower than an 11.3, you shouldn't be playing at Michigan. Sean O'Hara says, or that's my opinion, you shouldn't be playing at Michigan. I don't know. I'm tired of slow receivers. Sean O'Hara says, who is our next 5-star cornerback? I don't know if there is one this cycle, but, Haven Finney would be the guy that I think, could rise into that category. He's an elite corner out of California, recently reclassed, and is visiting Michigan this spring. Josh Jackson, you're obviously the best in the business at a relatively young age. How have you gotten so good at your job? I am not young, man. I'm like, I don't even know how old I am. I'm 34. I'm about to be 34 this year. I'm 33. Yeah, 33. I'm old as hell. In terms of how I got to doing recruiting, when I was 18 and I was a freshman, I emailed everybody I could and I said I'll work for free. And Rivals responded and said, you can work at this SMU site. And that's how I got my first job in recruiting, which paid me $100 a month. And yeah, that's that's what I did. And then I just, worked from there. I covered Texas at 24/7, obviously. And I started off making like $40,000 or something lame. And yeah, I would even pay for my own travel and do all sorts of things um, just to get my name out there and stuff. And obviously, I turned into the biggest villain in recruiting. But I still keep the same attitude. I mean, I still pay for a bunch of my own travel. Like I'll submit a bill for 500 and I'll pay like 200 of that. Like I'll do that for this Dallas, New Orleans trip. Like I still keep that same mindset. Like I'll pay for a lot of my stuff. I'll take the Spirit flight at 5 a.m. I'll take the Frontier flight. That's a red eye. I still do the same stuff I did when I was a young guy. Noah says, how's Ryder Lyons looking? Yeah, I mean, I think Michigan's really, in that top five, probably somewhere between 4 and 5. They have some work to do, but they've really built up some good momentum in the spring, or I'm sorry, in the winter going into spring. And I think the visit can really catapult Michigan into that, high end category. Customer service says, which 27 targets do you see reclassifying to 26? I mean, it's really a crapshoot. Could be anybody. Customer service says, who are the fastest wide receiver targets in the class? I mean, in terms of like actual verified track times, Mason James runs a 10.8. Brandon Bennett is a guy that like does absolutely no interviews, but he is a terrific track athlete, and Michigan saw him during the winter contact period, but slim pickings on fast wideouts. Customer service says, are there any punter or kicker targets? JB Brown's all over that. Wolverine Casual says, given those times you mentioned, Gatlin Bear posted sub 10.2s. Maybe we should pay him. Did he really? I don't think Gatlin Bear posted a 10.1 unless it was like wind aided. I'm literally like looking that up right now. I think Gatlin at one point ran a 10, like, yeah, he didn't. Well, he did. He ran that 10.15. Oh yeah, I remember that. It was wind aided. I think they added one. So, he would have been around a 10.26. But yeah, I mean, obviously that's blazing, like Olympic level, speed. He beat Nicholas Harbor in a race, I believe, as well. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely pay Gatlin Bear. I want fast receivers. And last question from Wolverine Casual said, could Kainoa Winston be the fastest dude on the team? I think Shamari could beat him in a race, but it would be close. No offense to Kainoa. But yeah, Shamari, I mean, he clocked some really, really good times as a junior, and he got hurt that offseason. He only ran like one meet. Shamari was like a junior All-American as a sophomore and competed at the same event that Kainoa competed in. So, as a young guy. So I think Shamari and Kainoa obviously bringing a ton of speed to Michigan secondary, which is super exciting. Just wish they could play some offense too. All right, guys, I appreciate y'all for joining me. Again, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for free. For more Michigan recruiting information on all the big visitors, head over to thewolverine.com. Use that promo code UM1, $1 for 2 months. And remember, get your own Chick-fil-A and go to myperfectfranchise.net. We will see you next Tuesday.